What happens when a man who has everything decides to risk it all for a moment of pure ego? This isn't just a story about cheating. It's about the shattering downfall of a titan, a man who believed he was so untouchable he could publicly humiliate his pregnant wife. He planned a lavish party at his breathtaking mansion to flaunt his new younger mistress to the world. But he never imagined his wife would show up, and he certainly never imagined she wouldn't come alone. This is the story of how one man's ultimate act of arrogance became the trigger for his own destruction, unleashed by the very woman he thought he had broken. Julian Davenport believed the world was his personal chessboard, and he was its undisputed king. At 45, he had the kind of wealth that didn't just whisper, it roared. His company, Aura Tech Dynamics, was at the forefront of AI integration, a monolith of glass and steel in the heart of Silicon Valley that had made him a billionaire before his 40th birthday. His life was a curated gallery of success, the sprawling Beverly Hills mansion with its infinity pool bleeding into the horizon, the fleet of European supercars gleaming in a climate-controlled garage, and the beautiful, elegant wife Eleanor. Eleanor Vance was to the outside world the perfect accessory to his empire. A former corporate lawyer with a mind as sharp as a diamond, she had willingly stepped back from her own promising career to manage their life, their charities, and their home. She was poised, intelligent, and possessed a quiet grace that made Julian's brash charisma seem almost refined. For 12 years, she had been his anchor, the silent partner in the brand of Julian Davenport. She was now 7 months pregnant with their first child, a son, the long-awaited heir to the Davenport dynasty. But over the last year, the gilded cage had begun to feel cold. Julian, once attentive and admiring of her intellect, had grown distant, his compliments becoming hollow, his eyes glazing over when she spoke of anything other than his own achievements. He was restless, a predator, pacing the confines of his own perfect life. He started speaking of legacy, of living authentically, phrases he'd picked up from self-help gurus, popular with men half his age. To Eleanor, it sounded like the desperate justification of a man about to make a terrible mistake. The mistake had a name, Chloe Sterling. Eleanor first saw her on Julian's private Instagram feed, which he carelessly left open on his office computer. Chloe was 23, an aspiring model and influencer, whose currency was her flawless filtered beauty and an ambition that burned through the screen. She was everything Eleanor was not loud, where Eleanor was quiet, flashy, where she was classic and brazenly available. Julian had started by funding her fledgling jewelry line, a mentorship, he'd called it. Eleanor knew it was a lie. The late-night board meetings, the sudden business trips to Miami and St. Bart's, the scent of a different perfume clinging to his suits. It was a painfully familiar cliché, just wrapped in more expensive packaging. Eleanor didn't confront him. A screaming match was not her style. It was a move for a queen, not a pawn, and she knew a direct emotional appeal would be dismissed as hormonal hysterics. Instead, she watched. She gathered information with the methodical precision of the lawyer she once was. She saw the secret credit card statements, the reservations for 2, the transfers to Chloe's business account that far exceeded any legitimate mentorship. Every piece of evidence was a small, sharp stone she placed on a scale, waiting for it to tip. The tipping point came with an announcement. Julian was hosting the annual Aura Tech Innovators Gala at their mansion this year, not at the usual downtown ballroom. "It's more personal," Ellie, he'd said. Barely looking up from his phone, a smirk playing on his lips. I want to show our friends and partners what true success looks like. I want it to be a night no one will ever forget. Eleanor knew instantly this wasn't for their friends or partners. It was for Chloe. It was a stage, and he was about to cast his mistress in a starring role right in the heart of their home. The audacity of it stole her breath. He wasn't just having an affair. He was planning to erase her, to publicly replace her in the life she had helped build. The quiet hum of betrayal inside her grew into a roaring fire. He thought she was a decorative doll, a placid pregnant wife who would sit quietly in the shadows. He had forgotten the woman he married. He had forgotten the lawyer who had once torn apart a hostile takeover bid with a single brilliantly worded clause. That night, as Julian slept the soundless sleep of the arrogant Eleanor, sat in her study, the soft glow of her laptop illuminating a face of calm, cold resolve. She pulled out a small, unassuming file from a locked drawer. It was their prenuptial agreement, a document she herself had helped draft 12 years ago. Julian's lawyers had called it ironclad. But Eleanor remembered a conversation, a small concession she had fought for a single clause he had dismissed as irrelevant. Clause 11b, the morality clause. It stipulated that in the event of a public act of infidelity that brought disrepute to the family name or marital union, the asset division would be subject to re-evaluation nullifying certain protections for the party at fault. Julian had laughed at it. "Who's going to know, Ellie? We're not politicians." She typed an email, her fingers moving swiftly across the keyboard. The recipient was Catherine Mercer, a name that made even the most ruthless corporate sharks flinch. She was the most feared divorce attorney in California, a woman known for dismantling empires with a scalpel, not a sledgehammer. The subject line was simple. "It's time." As she pressed send, she placed a gentle hand on her burgeoning belly, a quiet promise passed to her unborn son. She would not be erased. She would not be a victim in her own home. Julian wanted a night no one would ever forget. She would make sure he got his wish. Chloe Sterling saw Julian Davenport not as a man, but as a key to a world she had only ever witnessed through the glossy pages of magazines and the curated feeds of the ultra-wealthy. Growing up in a cramped suburban tract home, she had spent her life pressing her face against the glass of a life she was determined to enter. She was beautiful, and she had learned early that her beauty was a form of currency. It could buy her dinners open doors to exclusive clubs, and if she played her cards right, it could unlock the kingdom. Her meeting with Julian was a calculated accident. She'd spent weeks researching his habits, learning he frequented a specific high-end coffee shop in Palo Alto on Tuesday mornings. She made sure to be there accidentally, spilling her latte on his $1,000 Brioni suit. Her performance of flustered apology and wide-eyed awe was Oscar-worthy. He was instantly captivated. Julian didn't see the calculation. He saw a vibrant, adoring young woman who looked at him not as a husband or a corporate entity, but as a god. She laughed at all his jokes hung on his every word about server farms and market caps, and made him feel like the vital, powerful conqueror he believed himself to be. She was the antidote to his life of quiet, tasteful elegance with Eleanor. Eleanor's intelligence was a mirror, reflecting his own flaws and responsibilities. Chloe's admiration was a spotlight blinding him to everything but his own magnificence. He showered her with gifts, a penthouse apartment in West Hollywood, a white Porsche Cayenne, a wardrobe that cost more than her parents' house. He set up her jewelry business, Sterling Sparkle. and poured money into it, feeling a thrill at creating her, molding her. But for Chloe, these were just appetizers. The main course was legitimacy. She didn't want to be a secret tucked away in a condo. She wanted to be the woman on the billionaire's arm. "When will I meet your friends, Jules?" she'd ask, tracing patterns on his chest in the sterile, modern bedroom of her penthouse. "When will you tell her about us?" At first he was evasive. "It's complicated, baby. The timing has to be perfect." But Chloe was persistent. She knew her hold on him was tied to her youth and novelty, both of which had expiration dates. The news of Eleanor's pregnancy had been a terrifying jolt. A baby was a permanent link, a chain she couldn't break. She had to force his hand. She became cooler, more demanding, subtly threatening the one thing he couldn't bear: the loss of his new favorite toy. The idea for the party was his grand solution. It was a move of breathtaking arrogance, born from Chloe's pressure and his own messianic complex. "I'm hosting the Aura Tech Gala at the house," he told her one evening, his eyes alight with a feverish excitement. "And you're going to be my guest of honor. It's time I stopped hiding the best thing in my life. It's time I started living for myself." For Chloe, this was the coronation she had dreamed of. It wasn't just a party. It was her public debut. It was the moment she would transition from mistress to future wife. He told her Eleanor would be there, but would keep a low profile. "She's pregnant, emotional. She'll probably stay upstairs. She knows things are changing." He took her shopping for the event. At a private boutique on Rodeo Drive, he bought her a dress that was designed to cause a sensation, a column of shimmering liquid gold fabric that clung to every curve with a slit that ran dangerously high up her thigh. He paired it with a diamond necklace so heavy it felt like a royal collar. "I want everyone to see you." He'd whispered, his breath hot on her ear as she looked at her reflection in the mirror. "I want them to see my future." On the day of the gala, Chloe's excitement was a physical thing, a frantic fluttering in her chest. Her glam squad worked on her for hours, sculpting her face, coiling her hair into an intricate updo. When she was finally ready, she looked like a golden idol, a living trophy. As she rode in the back of the chauffeured car, up the winding canyon road to the Davenport estate, she felt a dizzying sense of triumph. The mansion was even more spectacular than in the photos. It was a monument to wealth, a palace of glass and white stone perched on the edge of a cliff, the lights of Los Angeles scattered like jewels below. The party was in full swing, a symphony of clinking champagne glasses, low murmuring jazz, and the scent of expensive perfume. Julian was waiting for her just inside the grand foyer. When he saw her, his jaw literally dropped. He took her hand, his eyes devouring her. "Perfect," he breathed. "Absolutely perfect." He immediately began parading her through the crowd. He introduced her to his business partner, Mark Chen, a stern-faced man who offered a curt nod and quickly excused himself. He introduced her to tech billionaires and venture capitalists, their wives looking. Chloe up and down with barely concealed disdain. Chloe didn't care. She smiled, laughed, and held Julian's hand, playing her part. She was the bright new thing, and these people, these relics of his old life, would just have to get used to it. She felt a brief passing curiosity about the wife. Where was she? Hiding upstairs, just as Julian had predicted. Chloe felt a small, cruel pang of pity for the pregnant, abandoned woman. But it was quickly extinguished by the intoxicating rush of her own victory. This was her house now, her life. The night was a blur of champagne compliments and Julian's possessive hand on the small of her back. He led her to the center of the grand terrace overlooking the city, and a hush fell over the crowd as he tapped a glass for a speech. This was it. The moment of her anointing. Chloe stood beside him, her heart pounding, a triumphant smile plastered on her face, completely unaware that she was not the star of the show, but merely a prop in a much larger, far more devastating drama that was about to unfold. The air on the terrace was thick with unspoken questions. Julian Davenport, a man known for his predictable corporate-sponsored galas, had turned his home into a stage, and every guest felt like they had been handed a script they hadn't read. They were a sea of designer suits and couture gowns, a who's who of Silicon Valley and LA finance, all murmuring behind their hands. The presence of the stunning young woman in the gold dress glued to Julian's side was the central topic. "That's Chloe." Sterling whispered, "A venture to capitalist's wife. My daughter follows her on Instagram. I thought she was just one of his mentees." "Looks like a full-blown mentorship to me," her husband snorted, eyeing the necklace around Chloe's neck. Julian, buoyed by champagne and an ego inflated to bursting point, was oblivious to the cynical undertones. He saw only admiration. He raised his glass, a brilliant smile stretched across his face. "Friends, partners, thank you all for coming," he began, his voice booming with practiced confidence. "I wanted to bring you all here to my home to celebrate not just another year of record profits for Auratech, but to celebrate a new chapter, a chapter of authenticity." He paused for dramatic effect, his eyes sweeping the crowd before landing with deliberate warmth on Chloe. He placed a hand possessively on her waist. "For too long, I've lived a life dictated by expectations, by what was proper or expected. But what is success if you can't share it with someone who inspires you, someone who brings passion and light into your world?" A collective, uncomfortable intake of breath rippled through the guests. This was more than a business speech. It was a public declaration. It was a brutal, deliberate humiliation of his absent pregnant wife. Chloe preened under the attention, her smile widening. She felt the eyes of every powerful woman there on her, and she mistook their shocked contempt for envy. So tonight, Julian continued, his voice thick with self-congratulation. "I want to toast to the future, to new beginnings, to embracing life with honesty and vigor, and to the incredible inspiration behind this new chapter. To Chloe." He raised his glass to her. A scattered, hesitant applause broke out. Most people just stared, their glasses frozen midway to their lips, their eyes darting towards the entrance of the house, as if expecting Eleanor to appear at any moment in a storm of righteous fury. But the grand glass doors remained closed. Mark Chen, Julian's longtime business partner, stood at the back, his face a mask of stone. He had warned Julian against this. "You're playing with fire, Julian. Eleanor is not someone you cross." Julian had laughed it off. "She's pregnant and comfortable, Mark. She won't rock the boat." Mark knew better. He knew the quiet, formidable intelligence Julian had taken for granted for over a decade. Having made his shocking proclamation, Julian was on a high. He pulled Chloe closer, kissing her openly for the first time in front of his entire world. The flash of a few phones discreetly raised captured the moment. Chloe felt a thrill course through her. The hard launch was complete. She had won. Julian led her through the party, accepting congratulations from the sycophants and ignoring the cold shoulders from those who respected Eleanor. He was untouchable. He was rewriting his life's narrative in real time, and it was exhilarating. He felt powerful, reborn. "Let me get you another drink, my dear," he said to Chloe, gesturing towards the bar set up near the edge of the infinity pool. "The best champagne for the best girl." As he walked towards the bar, the subtle jazz music that had been playing all evening came to an abrupt stop. The sudden silence was jarring. Every head turned towards the source of the interruption, the grand entrance to the terrace. The massive glass doors slid open, not with a dramatic burst, but with a silent, deliberate glide. And in the empty space stood Eleanor. She was not the hysterical crying mess everyone might have expected. There were no tears, no shouts. She was the picture of serene, lethal calm. She wore a simple and elegant navy blue maternity gown that did not hide her pregnancy but framed it, making it a statement of fact, of life, of consequence. Her hair was pulled back in a sleek chignon, and her face, devoid of its usual warm makeup, was pale but composed, her eyes holding an icy clarity. She looked like a queen about to pass sentence. And she was not alone. Flanking her were two figures who radiated an aura of expensive, formidable power. On her right was Catherine Mercer, her silver hair cut in a severe bob, her eyes like chips of granite. On her left was a stern, silver-haired man in a perfectly tailored suit, holding a leather briefcase. The party atmosphere didn't just evaporate. It was sucked into a black hole. The light chatter died. The clinking of glasses stopped. The only sound was the faint lapping of the water in the pool. Julian stood frozen by the bar, a bottle of Dom Perignon in his hand. The triumphant smile on his face slowly dissolved, replaced by a mask of stunned disbelief. His eyes darted from Eleanor to the lawyers and back again. This was not in his script. This was not supposed to happen. Chloe, standing alone in the center of the terrace, felt a cold dread wash over her. The golden dress suddenly felt cheap, her diamond necklace like a heavy chain. The eyes of the crowd shifted from her to Eleanor, and in their gaze, she finally saw the truth. It wasn't envy she had seen earlier. It was pity. She was not the future queen. She was the court jester in a tragedy she didn't understand. Eleanor took a single measured step forward. Her eyes met Julian's across the stunned silence of the terrace. She didn't need to say a word. In that one unwavering look, Julian Davenport felt the solid ground of his perfect world crack beneath his feet. The storm had not just arrived. It had been waiting patiently just beyond the door, and his own arrogance had just flung it wide open. The silence on the terrace was a physical weight, pressing down on the 100 or so guests. For a long moment, no one moved. It was a tableau Julian by the bar, his face a canvas of confusion turning to anger, Chloe a gilded statue of humiliation, and Eleanor a pillar of calm judgment at the threshold of her home. It was Catherine Mercer who broke the spell. She took a step forward, her heels clicking with sharp authority on the marble floor. Her voice when she spoke was not loud, but it cut through the silence with the precision of a surgeon's blade. "Julian Davenport," she said, her tone devoid of any emotion. "My name is Catherine Mercer. I am legal counsel for your wife, Eleanor Vance Davenport." The use of Eleanor's maiden name was a deliberate, calculated strike. It was a signal that the union was already fractured. Julian finally found his voice a strangled, indignant croak. "What is this, Eleanor? What is the meaning of this? You're ruining my party." Eleanor's expression didn't flicker. "Your party?" she asked, her voice soft, but carrying an undeniable strength. In my home. With my friends? I don't think so. Julian. She took another step forward, her gaze sweeping over the assembled guests, many of whom had been friends for years. People who had celebrated holidays in her home. People she had supported through their own trials. She saw their shame, their discomfort. I apologize to you all, she said, her voice clear and steady. I am sorry that my husband chose to involve you in such a distasteful public spectacle. Please feel free to leave. This is now a private family matter. It was a dismissal, and it worked instantly. There was a frantic, quiet scramble as guests, desperate to escape the impending explosion, began collecting their wraps and purses, murmuring apologies, and avoiding eye contact with Julian. It was a mass exodus of his power base. Within 2 minutes, the terrace was emptying, the crowd melting away, like ghosts leaving only a handful of key figures. Julian, Chloe Eleanor, and her lawyers and Mark Chen, who remained at the back a grim spectator. Julian's anger flared, fueled by the humiliation of his supporters abandoning him. "How dare you?" he snarled, taking a step toward Eleanor. "You come in here pregnant and hysterical, and you think you can... Don't you dare take another step toward my client." Catherine Mercer snapped, her voice dropping to a dangerous low. The man beside her, her partner, shifted his briefcase, his presence a silent, imposing barrier. Julian froze, finally realizing this was not an emotional outburst. This was a tactical maneuver. He turned his fury on Eleanor. "What do you want, Ellie money? Is that it? You think you can blackmail me? You signed the prenup. You get your settlement, and that's it. You have no leverage here. It was the arrogant proclamation of a man who believed his money made him invincible." Eleanor gave a small, sad shake of her head. "Leverage?" She repeated the word, as if tasting something bitter. "You always thought of love in terms of leverage, didn't you, Julian? Of assets and liabilities. You never understood." She then turned her gaze for the first time directly to Chloe. The younger woman flinched, as if struck. Eleanor's look wasn't hateful or angry. It was something far more devastating. It was dismissive. She looked at Chloe not as a rival, but as an object, a piece of evidence. "And you, Eleanor," said her voice, softening, slightly laced with a sliver of pity. "Miss Sterling, you are wearing the Seraphina necklace from Van Cleef & Arpels. It cost $1.2 million. It was purchased 2 weeks ago using a corporate account for Aura Tech Dynamics, coded as client acquisition expenses." Chloe's hand flew instinctively to the diamonds at her throat. Julian's face went white. "Your penthouse apartment?" Eleanor continued, her voice maintaining its eerily calm cadence, "is leased by a shell corporation, JCS Holdings, which is wholly owned by Julian, but funded directly from the marital trust account that I am a co-trustee of. The same account that paid for your Porsche, your wardrobe, and the $50,000 wire transfer to your Sterling Sparkle business last Tuesday." Every word was a perfectly aimed dart puncturing Julian's facade of control. He was sputtering now, his face turning a blotchy red. This is my money. I earned it." "You have no right. That's where you're wrong," Catherine Mercer interjected smoothly. "Under California community property law, and specifically under the terms of your prenuptial agreement, which you seem to have forgotten, any gross mismanagement or dissipation of marital assets for non-marital purposes constitutes a breach." She paused, letting the legal term hang in the air. "And Julian funding your mistress's lifestyle in such a flagrantly obvious way, is the very definition of dissipation. The man with the briefcase stepped forward and placed it on a glass table, the clicks of the latches echoing in the tense silence. He opened it, revealing not piles of documents but 3 sleek iPads. He handed one to Julian. "We have a full accounting." "Julian." Eleanor said, her voice now holding a note of finality. "Every receipt, every wire transfer, every hotel booking. For the last 18 months. It seems your new chapter of authenticity has been very, very expensive." Julian stared at the iPad, his hands trembling. On the screen was a detailed, color-coded spreadsheet that laid bare his entire secret life. The numbers, the dates, the locations. It was all there. A meticulous, undeniable record of his betrayal. His eyes darted around, looking for an escape, an argument, a way to regain control. But there was none. The confidence and power he had projected all night had crumbled, leaving behind a desperate, cornered man. He looked at Eleanor. Truly looked at her, and for the first time he didn't see his quiet, compliant wife. He saw a brilliant legal mind, a strategist who had patiently waited, gathered her forces and chosen the perfect moment to strike a moment of his own making at the peak of his hubris. The air grew thin. Julian's breathing became ragged, his chest heaving. The blood drained from his face. He staggered back, clutching his chest, his eyes wide with a terror that went beyond financial ruin. It was the terror of total absolute defeat. The king had not just been checked. He had been toppled from the board entirely, and he never even saw the move coming. The collapse was not instantaneous. It was a slow-motion crumbling. Julian stumbled backward, knocking over a stand, holding a bucket of champagne. The crash of glass and ice was the only sound that broke the stunned silence. He clutched at his chest, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, his eyes locked on Eleanor with a mixture of disbelief and primal fear. "It's not just the cheating, Julian Catherine Mercer," said her voice as cold and unforgiving as a coroner's report. She gestured to the second iPad, which her colleague now held out. "This is where it gets much more serious for you." With a swipe of her finger, a new set of documents appeared on the screen. Documents that had nothing to do with necklaces and penthouses. These were intercompany fund transfers, stock option agreements, and minutes from board meetings. "For the past 6 months, Catherine stated you have systematically been trying to devalue marital assets in anticipation of a divorce. You've been transferring intellectual property from Aura Tech, a community asset, to a new offshore entity in the Cayman Islands. You've diluted your own stock options and reissued them to shell corporations under your sole control. You have, in short, been committing massive fraud, not just against your wife, but against your company and your shareholders." Mark Chen, who had been watching silently from the shadows, took a sharp step forward, his face ashen. "The Cayman entity, Julian, you told me that was for an R&D tax shelter." Julian couldn't answer. A wheezing sound escaped his lips. He was looking at evidence of felonies of a deliberate criminal conspiracy to hide hundreds of millions of dollars. Eleanor spoke, then her voice quiet but firm, cutting through the legal jargon. "Do you remember Clause 11B? Julian, the morality clause you laughed at. We're invoking it. Your public affair, this party." She gestured around the now empty terrace, "is the trigger. But the fraud is the cannonball that sinks the entire ship." She looked him directly in the eye. "The prenup is now void. Everything is community property, 50%. And since you attempted to defraud me of my half, my lawyers will be arguing for a punitive award of a much higher percentage. We're also filing for an immediate injunction to freeze all your assets, personal and corporate. As of this moment, you can't sell a single stock or access a single bank account." The finality of her words hung in the air. Julian's entire empire, the source of his identity, his power, his very being had just been paralyzed. He finally tore his eyes from Eleanor and looked wildly at Chloe. She stood frozen, a deer in the headlights of an oncoming train. In his panicked mind, she was the cause, the catalyst for this utter ruin. "You," he rasped, pointing a trembling finger at her. "This is your fault. You and your endless wanting." Chloe recoiled, her face a mask of shock and hurt. The man who had called her his future just minutes before was now casting her as the villain in his downfall. "Me," she stammered. You told me you loved me. You said you were leaving her. Leave her." Julian let out a horrifying, choked laugh. "You were a diversion, a toy. You think I would throw my life away for you." The cruelty of his words, born of pure desperation, finally shattered Chloe's gilded fantasy. The diamonds around her neck felt like a noose. The designer dress felt like a costume. She saw herself as everyone else, saw her a temporary amusement, a fool who had believed the hollow promises of a rich, bored man. Tears welled in her eyes, smearing her perfect makeup. It was too much for Julian. The betrayal, the public humiliation, the sudden stark realization of his financial and legal ruin, all coalesced into a single, crushing weight. The air refused to enter his lungs. A sharp, searing pain shot up his left arm. His vision tunneled the glittering lights of the city below, blurring into a meaningless smear. With a final guttural gasp, his legs gave out. He collapsed, falling heavily onto the marble terrace, the iPad slipping from his grasp and clattering across the floor. His eyes rolled back in his head. For a moment, there was a stunned silence, then chaos. "Oh my God!" Julian, Chloe shrieked, rushing forward. Catherine Mercer's associate was already on his phone. "I'm calling 911. We have a male, mid-40s, collapsed suspected cardiac event." Eleanor stood perfectly still. She watched the scene unfold with a strange, detached calm. She felt no triumph, no joy, only a profound and weary sadness. This whole sordid, ugly spectacle was the final dying gasp of the life she had once loved, the man she had once believed in. She had come prepared for a legal battle, for shouting for denial. She had not come prepared for this. As her lawyer's associate calmly gave their address to the dispatcher, and as Chloe knelt beside Julian, hysterically begging him to wake up, Eleanor placed a protective hand on her stomach. She felt a gentle kick from within a small life, blissfully unaware of the wreckage around him. It was a reminder of her true purpose. This wasn't about revenge. It was about survival. It was about securing a future for her child, a future free from the toxicity and lies of the man now lying broken at her feet. She had not started this war, but she had been determined to end it, and the cost was now laid bare in the most dramatic way imaginable. The wail of sirens grew from a distant cry to an urgent scream echoing up the canyon road. Red and blue lights washed over the pristine white stone of the mansion, painting the scene of collapse in frantic, pulsing strokes of color. Paramedics stormed the terrace with a gurney and medical bags, their professional urgency cutting through the lingering drama. Chloe was pushed aside, a weeping, incoherent mess, her golden dress now looking garish and out of place amidst the life-saving equipment. Is he going to be okay?" she pleaded to anyone who would listen. But the paramedics ignored her, their focus entirely on the unconscious man on the floor. They worked quickly, attaching electrodes, administering an IV, their voices a calm, steady stream of medical terminology. Eleanor watched from a distance, Catherine Mercer standing quietly by her side. She didn't move closer. She felt a profound disconnect, as if watching a scene from a movie. This man whose heartbeat she once knew so well she could feel it in her sleep was now a medical emergency. A stranger surrounded by other strangers. Mark Chen approached her, his face etched with worry and a deep, simmering anger directed at his fallen friend. "Eleanor, I am so sorry," he stammered. "I tried to warn him. I told him he was underestimating you." "It's not your fault," Eleanor replied, her voice tired but clear. "He did this to himself. He just chose my home as the stage." The paramedics loaded Julian onto the gurney. As they wheeled him past, his eyes fluttered open for a brief second, unfocused and terrified. They landed on Eleanor, and in them she saw not hatred, but the dawning, horrifying comprehension of a man who has lost everything. Then his eyes rolled back, and he was gone, wheeled out into the night, the siren's wail fading as the ambulance sped away toward Cedars-Sinai. With Julian gone, a strange and hollow quiet descended upon the terrace. All that remained was the debris of the party-abandoned glasses, a crushed canapé, and the lingering scent of expensive perfume. Chloe was a wreck, mascara streaking down her face, her body trembling. She looked at Eleanor, a desperate, pathetic plea in her eyes. "I didn't know," she whispered the words, catching in a sob. "He told me he loved me. He told me you two were already over." Eleanor regarded her for a long moment. She saw not a villain, but a girl who had bet everything on a fantasy and lost spectacularly. "He told you what you wanted to hear," Eleanor said, her voice devoid of malice. That was always his greatest talent. She then turned to Catherine's associate. "Please call a car for Miss Sterling. Have it take her wherever she needs to go." It was a final, quiet act of dismissal. Chloe wasn't a threat anymore. She was just collateral damage. A car was summoned, and Chloe stripped of her benefactor, and her triumphant fantasy was escorted away, a ghost in a golden dress, vanishing from a life she had only briefly touched. Finally, Eleanor was alone with her legal team on the vast, empty terrace of her soon-to-be former home. "Are you all right?" Catherine asked, her professional demeanor softening with a hint of genuine concern. Eleanor took a deep breath, the cool night air feeling clean in her lungs. "I will be," she said. She walked to the edge of the terrace and looked out over the sprawling, glittering expanse of Los Angeles. For 12 years, she had looked at this view and seen it as a symbol of everything she and Julian had built together. Now it looked different. It looked like a future. Her future. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now," Catherine said, stepping up beside her, "the real work begins. The injunction will be granted by an emergency judge by morning. We'll take control of the discovery process. Julian's board will be notified of the fraud allegations. The SEC will likely get involved. It's going to be a long, messy process, Eleanor. But you hold all the cards. He is financially and legally cornered." "And his health?" Eleanor asked, a flicker of the woman who had once loved him surfacing. "That's out of our hands," Catherine said, gently but firmly. But whatever happens, you and your child are protected. That was the goal, and we have achieved it." Eleanor nodded, turning away from the city lights and looking back at the huge, empty glass house. It no longer felt like a home. It felt like a museum of a life that was over. She knew she could never live here again. It was tainted by Julian's betrayal and the ugly drama of this night. She thought of her sister Sarah, who was waiting anxiously by the phone. Eleanor had confided in her weeks ago, and Sarah had been her rock, the one person who reminded her of her own strength when she started to doubt her course of action. She needed to call her. She needed to hear a familiar, loving voice. This night had been the dramatic public severing of her marriage. It was brutal, theatrical, and more traumatic than she could have ever imagined. But it was also a necessary amputation. Julian's lies were a sickness, and she had surgically removed them from her life and the life of her unborn son. The recovery would be long, but for the first time in over a year, Eleanor Vance felt like she could finally breathe again. The gilded cage was broken, and she was free. 6 months later, the unrelenting glare of the Beverly Hills sun had been replaced by the soft, diffused light of a Santa Monica morning. The ocean breeze, carrying the scent of salt and blooming jasmine, drifted through the open windows of a tastefully restored craftsman home. This house didn't shout its value from a clifftop. It hummed with a quiet, confident warmth. In a nursery painted in serene shades of cream and sage green, Eleanor rocked her 3-month-old son, Arthur. He was small and perfect, his tiny hand curled around her finger, his breath a gentle rhythm against her chest. This was the peace she had fought for. The weeks immediately following that disastrous night had been a whirlwind of managed chaos. The story had, of course, leaked. The press had a field day, branding it the billionaire's bust and painting lurid pictures of the showdown. Paparazzi had camped outside the gates of the mansion, but Catherine Mercer, with the efficiency of a military general, had erected a legal fortress around Eleanor. A strict gag order was put in place, and a single concise statement was released, citing irreconcilable differences and requesting privacy. The narrative was controlled. The speculation eventually died down, replaced by the next society scandal. Inside that fortress, Eleanor had navigated the final exhausting months of her pregnancy, while Catherine dismantled Julian's life's work. It was a methodical, brutal process. Every lie Julian had ever told, every corner he had cut, every asset he had tried to hide, was brought into the harsh light of legal discovery. He was a master of the grand gesture, but his deceptions were clumsy, arrogant, and easily unraveled by a team that knew exactly where to look. Julian's own world had shrunk to a sterile room at Cedars-Sinai, and then to a series of cold, impersonal lawyers' offices. The heart attack had permanently weakened him, leaving him with a slight tremor in his hand, and a pallor that no amount of California sun could erase. His friends and business associates, the ones who had toasted his success, now crossed the street to avoid him. He was no longer a king. He was a liability. Oratech, under Mark Chen's frantic damage control, had forced his resignation and bought out his shares for a fraction of their peak value to sever ties completely. He was facing SEC investigations for securities fraud and was burning through what little capital he had left on criminal defense attorneys. He had traded his empire for an evening of ego, and the price was absolute. Chloe Sterling had been the first piece of debris to be washed away. After being sent from the party in a town car, she found her key cards to the penthouse deactivated the next morning. The Porsche was repossessed a day later. The Sterling Sparkle business account was empty. Her frantic, tearful calls to Julian went unanswered. She had been a disposable asset, and her value had plummeted to zero. Her brief, dazzling flight was over, and the landing was hard. For Eleanor, the true beginning of her new life came not in a courtroom, but in a delivery room. The moment she held Arthur for the first time, the last vestiges of the old world fell away. Looking into her son's innocent eyes, she felt a fierce, protective love that eclipsed all the pain and anger of the past year. He was her future, a clean slate, a reason for everything. This tiny, perfect human was her true legacy, not a portfolio or a company name. That clarity of purpose fueled her next chapter. After selling the clifftop mansion, a place she now thought of as an opulent prison, she used a significant portion of the settlement to establish the Vance Foundation. It was a venture capital firm with a difference. Her mission was to invest in female-led startups, specifically targeting women who, like her, had been professionally sidelined by family obligations or partnerships. Her first meeting was with a woman named Maria, a brilliant software engineer who had an idea for an educational app but had been dismissed by every male-dominated VC firm in the valley. They met in Eleanor's new sunlit office, which overlooked a garden instead of a cityscape. Maria was nervous, her pitch a little shaky. Eleanor didn't see a risk. She saw herself. She saw the talent and intelligence that the world so often overlooked. "The business plan is sound," Eleanor said, closing the folder. "But tell me about you, Maria. What happens if this fails?" Maria was taken aback. I don't know. I guess I go back to freelance work." "No," Eleanor said, leaning forward. "That's the old way of thinking. Our investments come with support. Mentorship, childcare, stipends, networking. We're not just investing in an idea. We're investing in the founder. Because I know that your success isn't just about the numbers. It's about having a foundation strong enough to let you build." She approved the seed funding on the spot. It was in these moments that Eleanor truly healed. She was using the capital Julian's betrayal had inadvertently provided to build something good, something that empowered rather than dominated. She was transforming the poison of her past into an antidote for others. Her sister Sarah sat on the armchair in the nursery, watching the tender moment between mother and son. "I got a call from a mutual friend," Sarah said softly. They saw Julian. He was eating alone at a diner in the valley. They said he looked old. Eleanor didn't look up from Arthur's face. She considered this image of the man who had once commanded boardrooms, now hunched over a coffee in a cheap diner. She felt a faint echo of pity, but it was distant, like a memory from someone else's life. "That's sad," she said, and she meant it. But it was the detached sadness one might feel for a stranger's misfortune. "He tried to reach out last week." Eleanor added her voice even. "An email. It came through the lawyers. What did it say?" Sarah asked, her curiosity piqued. A long, rambling mix of blaming me, blaming Chloe, blaming the market. And then at the end he asked if he could see Arthur. Eleanor paused, gently stroking her son's soft cheek. He wrote, "He's the only thing I have left." "My God," Sarah breathed. "What did you do?" "I thought about it for a long time," Eleanor confessed. "I thought about what was fair and what was right for Arthur, and I realized that Julian doesn't get to claim him as a possession, as the last thing he has left. Arthur is not an asset. He is a person. One day when he is old enough, he can choose to know his father. But that relationship will be on Arthur's terms, Not Julian's, not mine. She looked at her sister, her eyes clear and resolved. So I told the lawyers to send a single-sentence reply. All communication regarding Arthur will be handled by the family court. And then I deleted his email. It was the final closing of a door, done without anger or fanfare. A contented sigh escaped Arthur's lips as he slept. Eleanor smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile that reached her eyes. "He's so peaceful," she whispered. "He has a peaceful home," Sarah replied. And that was the truth of it. The story of Julian Davenport's fall would be whispered about for years, a cautionary tale of hubris and consequence. But here in this quiet, sunlit room, another story was being written. It wasn't about revenge or destruction. It was about reclamation. It was the story of a woman who had been thrust into a storm, and instead of letting it break her, had learned to sail. She hadn't just escaped the gilded cage. She had melted it down and forged a new key, unlocking a future of her own design, built not on the shifting sands of ego and betrayal, but on the solid foundation of her own strength for herself and for her son. The story of Eleanor Vance and Julian Davenport is a powerful reminder that true strength often lies not in loud displays of power, but in quiet, calculated resolve. It shows us that underestimating someone can be the most fatal mistake, and that integrity in the end is the only asset that can't be frozen, seized, or devalued. This wasn't just a story of a marriage ending. It was the story of a woman's identity being reborn from the ashes of betrayal. If this story of resilience and justice resonated with you, if you believe in the power of fighting back against the odds, then please let us know. Don't forget to hit that like button to show your support, and share this video with someone who might need to hear a story of quiet triumph. And of course, if you want more true-to-life stories that are packed with drama twists and powerful life lessons, make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what's coming next.